Hello, everybody. Welcome to Next Futures. I'm Mark Bergen, the founder of Better Future, and joining me is Maria Scott.
Hi, Mark.
Over the last 4 years, we've been working in a foundation which was previously called the Better Future Housing Foundation. And our goal there was to go work on scalable solutions around homelessness. And the journey has been a pretty wild ride, hasn't it, Maria? Not what we
Oh,
thought
yeah.
we were going to get involved with.
No, it's a new
So
adventure every
about
day.
I know, and what's interesting is a lot of it comes down to terminology. A lot of it comes down to posturing. Some of it comes down to people trying to steal an agenda for their purpose, not necessarily respecting the broad spectrum that this has. That's why we've got this podcast so that we can explore the aspects across that spectrum there. So we decided to rename the Better Future Housing Foundation to the Next Futures Foundation, and we also changed some of our focus and purpose. Over the next 25 years, which is the time it will take to correct the housing affordability imbalance that exists, we know that there's some people who are going to still have their very productive asset portfolios who have 10 or 100 investment properties, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That's the market. Then we've got other people who are living in anxious households, and there's other people who are living in a painful existence, not necessarily in a household. They might be homeless where they're borrowing couches, they may be sleeping in somebody's caravan, or in worst case, they might be sleeping rough. So we've got those people who are in extreme pain and that they're struggling. We've got other people who are nervous whether and anxious about will they be able to go and afford the house that they're in? What happens if they get ill? What happens if there's a gap in work for them? There's a lot of anxiety out there. In fact, those two groups represent somewhere between 65 and 70% of the population. So Maria and I have been spending time over the last 4 years working out what could we do that actually improves this. And that's why we're having this conversation, because we've realized the ambiguity that exists in the term housing crises. It's a very simple answer to a very complex scenario, isn't it, Maria?
There's a number of issues that are on the spectrum. And what we hope to do during this conversation is explore all of those elements that are on that spectrum.
Now, for some people, the idea of defining it as a spectrum is going to be relief. For other people, it might be challenging. We understand that. This is not a without impact or without consequence topic to go discuss with people. For the people who are in the extreme pain end of the scale, the fact that we may be speaking about those people who have a number of investment properties is because that's the balance. It appears that equilibrium is out, and that's often referred to as the K economy, where we have some people that are rising up and other people are rising down. And for most of the last, we'll say 80 years, that difference has been much, much smaller. And now what we're seeing is that there's a bit of separation there. So that's policy, and policy takes a long while to change. But when we began this, it was actually how can design and architecture work on the responses to people's housing needs? Architecture and design does not address policy. It's really good at responding to the conditions that exist. And so our focus is how do we work on making the ride easier for people over the next 20 to 25 years, rather than necessarily trying to lobby for change there. Let's work out what can we do that helps people in the condition that they're in. Maria, this is a really big difference from where we started from 4 years ago.
Certainly is. And that's the joy about any organization, especially a charity, is that it has to evolve because the
Mm.
market evolves and conditions change, elements change. And when we talk about the housing spectrum and those elements that we have on that, people will go also from one of those elements to another. So they might go from very secure at the moment to not so
Mm.
secure given their changing circumstances. We also have, over the last 4 years, looked at various sectors and aging, and they also shift between what they might have started out as very secure and thriving to now taking on some anxiety because of lifestyle and situational change.
Yeah. And we know that through over the last year, we've been running a thing called the Community Lab, which has been our research incubation space. And we were asking a couple of very interesting questions there. And one was, how long do you expect to live for, and how are you going to get there? And one of the big issues is how are you going to get there from health? How are you going to get there from finances? And how are you going to get there from purpose? Did astound me was most people were more than 20 years under their forecast age.
Everybody expects that they won't live as long as they probably will, and therefore don't put in
Mm.
place the measures that they need to actually survive for that period of time.
And we know that our financial systems are based on forecasts that come from actuaries. And currently, the actuaries have the age that we need to plan for superannuation is 103. That's their modelling.
That's scary.
Well, it is scary because people who feel that they may actually have enough means or finances to get them to 85, there's another 15 years beyond that. And that may be unfunded because Maria and I, before we went to record this, we were talking about, well, there's some people who are very secure now with no debt in their family home, and that they decide that it's come time for them to move into another form of housing. And there may not be properties for them to move into, or it may be at such a high expense that they delay doing it. And when they delay doing it, then you wind up with other cascading problems that come around that is not functional for you. So we know that there's multiple cascading problems, but if we don't talk about the spectrum and we don't deal with being able to have intelligent conversations about the niche conditions that people are living in, we're going to be talking at cross purposes. And that's why
Yeah.
we're picking up the housing spectrum.
We also talked about the longevity of a program like this. It is, in an analogy term, a little bit like trying to turn the Titanic. It's not an easy task, and it needs to have a long term approach to it. So the strategy needs to evolve over 10 to 25 years rather than just having a short term approach to it. We've
Mm,
been talking since you and I started the foundation to housing affordability and the housing now crisis, but that needs a long-term look at it. It can't just be a short-term strategy. It has to evolve over time,
yeah,
and there has to be a number of things that are input into that in order for it to work. We were also talking how we will reach net zero before we actually get
mm,
to solve the housing affordability issue.
yep. And here's four interesting facts. Net zero will be solved by 2050. That is the government's agenda. That's what we're on track to do. Yet, wage equality for women across their working life will be 137 years, not 25 years, 137 years. The idea of reducing domestic violence by 50%, that's forecast to be between 50 to 70 years until we've reduced domestic violence by 50%. And housing affordability, unless policies are put in place, will take more than 25 years. So we're going to fix the environmental carbon problem before we fix the human problem. Actually, they're all human problems because
Yeah.
part of the environmental issue is that it makes it even harder for people to live in marginal houses, which means that we have to think about how are we rising the floor up. We've noticed that the top end of the market's gone, but now the separation between the top and that bottom part of the market is now much greater. That's why there's a housing affordability crisis that we've got. So, over the coming months, we'll be inviting people who are experts in particular areas of the housing spectrum to look and discuss about what they're doing in the housing spectrum. But we will be publishing the spectrum as a PDF file so people have a reference and that we can start to talk about those people who are struggling. Think of the people who are sleeping rough, the people who are attending food kitchens, food banks. They are absolutely struggling, and we need to do acute things now to address them. We'll also be talking about those people who are feeling pain as far as affordability, where they're having to forego other things. And that often comes down to when more than 30% of the household income is going on rent or a mortgage. And that's actually called mortgage stress, rental stress that's in there. And then there's other people who are just in discomfort. They may not even have debt on their house, but they know when they go to change and change their circumstance that they're going to have a degree of discomfort, or they have family members who are having discomfort. You know, the bank of mum and dad has been able to go pad out for a lot of people, but it doesn't mean that they're not anxious about what happens to the generation after them. And then we'll bring in some people who will also talk about, well, what's happening on the thriving side? The people who have one investment property might be called a holiday home that they do a little bit of renting out. Nothing wrong with that. People who have a portfolio of 10 investment properties, nothing wrong with that. That's what the market has afforded them. And the people who have 100 or more investment properties. Again, nothing wrong with it, but we need to have equilibrium where we're getting the balance so that those people who are down in the struggling are struggling a bit less, and we're not just focusing on the people who are at the top end of the market at how much that they're able to extract and gain. It's going to be a very interesting journey. I'm sure we know only a small fraction of what we're going to know over the next 6 or 12 months. And I'm quite excited to look forward to it.
Yeah. The other thing that we've always talked about as we've gone on this journey, and now that we are Next Futures Foundation, is that this is a whole of community approach. This
Mm.
includes interaction from every level across the spectrum. So it's not only government, they can't do it alone. We've always said that. It has to be a whole of community approach. So there are going to be people that are interviewed over the course of the next few series that will have ideas that will create solutions. And we need to be listening to those.
Absolutely. This is about housing literacy. We need to be able to become more literate in the way that we converse and exchange with each other. And that's going to take a little bit of time to go find out what are those terms that we can commonly use. And also, how do we actually help the people who have got those as a handle that they can grab onto? And the initiative that we're going to be looking at is community map. And how do we map out by local government area various initiatives? It's one very important thing to look at community cohesion, but there's different approaches that are important for different parts of the spectrum. What we will be able to do is look at what are the solutions that are functioning across these different parts of the need group, and then where are there some gaps? Because when we identify gaps, then we can start to work on, well, how do we deal with that condition? It's going to be a very exciting journey. We're going to learn a lot. Hopefully, you learn a lot. And it comes in around the idea of having housing literacy, because talking about a housing crisis is almost like talking about sport as a singular. And as we know, there's a big spectrum of what sport is, and there's a big spectrum when it comes to housing. And we need to make sure that we're working out what those different areas are so that we're able to think of the people who have acute need, the people who have discomfort, and the people that are thriving.
I think that the spectrum is an interesting way to approach it. And I believe that the people that we will have come on board for future input will actually help us towards achieving some of the outcomes that we've been talking about.
I'm absolutely sure about that, because we're not going to do this alone. This is something which is about collective knowledge, it's about collective intelligence. And I've got a feeling there's a lot more across the spectrum that may not have been threaded together. And if we can work out how to thread it together, we're going to make the ride for people through their life easier. They're going to know where they should be finding support and what types of language that they should be using, because we know, particularly in the people who are in that struggling, painful section, that we've got things like there's shelters, there's support networks, there's all sorts of operators there. And in most, it's like a constellation of people who are providing different type of support and help. And working out how to stitch that together is something that we've seen being done in a digital way through organizations like Info Exchange. Let's go see if we can create a map that helps people to be able to navigate, because I've got a feeling it's a little bit hard to go find your way around.
I completely agree with you because the community map will be an important tool. And let's start to coin the phrase it takes a village to build a village. That's what it is. It's about that approach to everybody getting their heads together to see if we can produce some good outcomes.
Maria, I look forward to seeing you in our next episode with a guest.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for your time.